Walk through almost any American suburb and notice what isn't there. Thousands of houses, thousands of front lawns, almost no fences. The property lines exist, you just can't see them. The grass of one yard blends into the next. Children cross from one property to another without passing through a gate. Neighbors can see each other's front doors from 100 feet away. The whole street seems to flow together into a single, uninterrupted landscape. It feels completely normal. Most Americans never think to ask why, but travel almost anywhere else in the world, and the picture changes entirely. Stone walls in England, iron gates in France, brick fences in the Netherlands, walled courtyards in Spain, tall hedges in Germany, private gardens, clearly bounded, clearly defined, homes separated from one another by centuries of tradition. So why is America different? The answer is not that Americans are naturally more open or trusting than other people. For most of this country's history, residential fences were everywhere. The picket fence was a symbol of middle-class respectability. The split-rail fence was a fact of rural life. The decorative iron fence signaled that someone had property worth defining. The open front lawn was not organic. It was not chosen by the families who live in it. It was designed, marketed, enforced, and eventually inherited as though it had always been the natural state of neighborhood life. This is the story of how a specific design idea proposed by a landscape architect, adopted by developers, enforced by homeowners associations, quietly removed the fence from the American front yard, and what happened to daily life when it was gone. The fence didn't disappear because Americans decided they preferred open neighborhoods. It disappeared because specific people, with specific purposes, made that decision for them. And once it was made often enough, it stopped looking like a decision at all. Chapter 1. When America had fences. For most of American history, fences were not a statement. They were simply how things worked. Colonial towns depended on them. Fences contained livestock, protected kitchen gardens, and marked where one person's land ended and another's began. In a society where a neighbor's pig in your vegetable garden was a genuine grievance with genuine consequences, the fence was practical infrastructure. As American cities grew through the 19th century, the fence evolved from a practical tool into a social one. Decorative iron fences fronted the homes of the urban middle class. Ornamental picket fences bordered the yards of families who had arrived at the kind of respectability that required marking. The fence was an announcement. Here is my property. Here is where I live. Here is what I have. A visitor to almost any American residential street in 1880 would have found fences everywhere, not as a curiosity, but as a basic feature of the residential landscape. The unfenced front lawn that feels so natural to 21st century Americans did not exist as a general pattern. It had to be invented. The invention began with an argument. In 1870, a landscape gardener named Frank Scott published a book called The Art of Beautifying Suburban Home Grounds. It was one of the most widely read residential landscape books of the 19th century, and it contained a claim that reads, in retrospect, as the ideological seed of the entire open lawn movement. Scott argued that front yard fences were unkind. His exact words, "It is unkind to shut out from the view of passers-by whatever of beauty may be in our grounds. Beauty," he believed, should be shared with the community rather than enclosed for private enjoyment. A neighbor who planted a beautiful garden and then fenced it away from the street was, in Scott's view, a kind of aesthetic miser hoarding a gift that properly belonged to everyone who walked past. This was not a practical argument. It was a moral one. And it arrived at a moment when American residential culture was becoming increasingly interested in exactly this kind of moral framing around the home and neighborhood. The intellectual case for removing the front yard fence was being made in 1870, but ideas need physical form before they can become a landscape. That form would come from a landscape architect who was already redefining what Americans thought designed outdoor space could accomplish. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Chapter 2. Olmsted and the neighborhood that flowed like a park. Frederick Law Olmsted is best known for Central Park. But the project that most directly shaped the American suburb is one most people have never heard of. In 1869, Olmsted and his partner Calvert Vaux designed Riverside, Illinois, a planned residential community on the Des Plaines River, southwest of Chicago. It was the first fully realized American suburb in the modern sense, a residential community designed from the beginning around the assumption that residents would commute to the city for work. Olmsted's design for Riverside was built around a philosophy he had been developing for years, that a well-designed landscape could produce social and psychological benefits for the people who moved through it. Central Park was the demonstration at urban scale. Riverside was the demonstration at neighborhood scale. The physical features of the design expressed a specific set of ideas. Streets curved gently, rather than following a grid, producing the sense of discovery and visual variety that straight streets cannot. Trees were planted abundantly. Homes were set back from the road by a minimum of 30 feet, and the space between the house and the road was to be maintained as open, uninterrupted lawn. This requirement was written into the deed restrictions governing every property in Riverside. The effect was exactly what Olmsted intended, a neighborhood that appeared to be one large, flowing park with homes set within it. Individual properties were visible but not clearly bounded. The visual experience was of shared green space, not divided private plots. Olmsted believed this arrangement was democratic. Beauty shared with the street belonged, in some sense, to everyone who passed through. The neighbor with the best garden was contributing it to the public visual experience of the community. The fence, which would have reduced that contribution to nothing, was quietly excluded from the design. The open lawn at Riverside also carried a social signal that would follow it for generations. A neighborhood that didn't need fences was a neighborhood that didn't need protection. It was orderly. It was prosperous. It was the kind of place where people didn't have to guard what they had. The open lawn in this reading was not just an aesthetic preference. It was a statement about the kind of community this was and the kind of people who lived in it. Riverside remained what it was designed to be, a community for people with the means to live in carefully planned surroundings. For the next 70 years, the open lawn ideal stayed largely within the world of high-end planned communities. Then the Second World War ended, and everything changed. Chapter 3. The Forgotten Pioneer. Before William Levitt, there was J.C. Nichols. Jesse Clyde Nichols was a Kansas City developer who began building what he called the Country Club District in 1906. He was not the first American developer to use deed restrictions governing the appearance of homes and properties, but he was the most systematic, the most comprehensive, and the most widely studied. Nichols's deed restrictions covered architecture, landscaping, maintenance requirements, and the racial composition of residents. They were not subtle documents. They specified what materials could be used for home exteriors. They required grass to be maintained. They addressed the placement of structures on lots, and they explicitly excluded non-white buyers, a provision that was not unusual in American real estate of the period, but that Nichols applied with particular thoroughness and defended with particular vigor. The Country Club District grew into one of the most commercially successful residential developments in American history. It was beautiful, carefully maintained, and profitable. Developers across the country studied it. The combination of architectural controls, landscaping requirements, and community governance that Nichols had assembled became a template, adapted, modified, and replicated in developments that followed his model, without always knowing they were following it. The open lawn that the Country Club District featured was not merely aesthetic, it was part of the system. Open, visually unified neighborhoods were easier to appraise consistently. They maintained property values more reliably. Banks preferred lending in them. Buyers expected them. The open lawn was not just a pretty idea borrowed from Olmsted. It was a commercially rational feature of a system designed to protect investment. That system also protected the demographic homogeneity of the neighborhoods it created. The same deed restrictions that required open lawns also barred black residents. The suburbs, where the open lawn aesthetic would eventually flourish at national scale, were being built, from the beginning, as racially exclusive environments. The aesthetic and the exclusion were not separate features of the post-war suburb. They were parts of the same document. Nichols's model worked commercially, and it worked for decades. When the post-war housing boom arrived in the late 1940s, developers needed a template for building at a scale nobody had attempted. They had one. It had been waiting for them in Kansas City since 1906. Chapter 4. Abraham Levitt's Lawn. The commonly told story is that William Levitt built Levittown. The less told story is that Abraham Levitt, William's father, shaped what it looked like. William handled the production side of the family business. The financing, the land acquisition, the marketing, the political relationships. Abraham was the one who cared about landscape. He was personally and genuinely passionate about horticulture, about trees, about the visual quality of the neighborhoods his family was building. When Levittown's marketing materials showed flowing open lawns and carefully planted trees, Abraham's sensibility was behind the image. He planted 2 trees per home, a documented personal initiative that shaped the visual character of the development. He required that grass be cut at least once a week during the growing season, a requirement enforced during the early years of the development. He thought about what the neighborhood would look like from the street, and he designed landscape standards to produce a specific answer to that question. The deed restrictions and lease agreements that governed Levittown homes included requirements about lawn maintenance and appearance. Some of these addressed fencing restricting or limiting front yard fencing in ways that preserved the visual continuity of the open lawn aesthetic. The specific reason for these restrictions, as stated in Levitt's own documents, was property value protection and neighborhood consistency. Whether the open lawn aesthetic was also valued for marketing purposes for the brochure photographs that showed rows of homes in flowing green settings is a reasonable inference from the evidence. It is not a documented statement of intent. What is documented is that Levittown's marketing relied heavily on images of those open lawns. The development looked spacious in photographs, in part because the yards appeared to flow together without visible boundaries. This made the actual lot sizes, modest by any later standard, feel more generous than they were. The visual continuity that the open lawn created was commercially useful. Whether it was consciously planned for photography or simply a feature that happened to photograph well is a distinction the historical record does not clearly resolve. What happened next is not in dispute. Levittown worked. The homes sold faster than they could be built. Families arrived before foundations were poured. And developers across the country studied the photographs, the sales figures, and the deed restriction documents, and began building their own versions. Levittown was the demonstration project. Thousands of subdivisions across America would follow its model, not because anyone ordered them to, but because the formula had proven it worked. Open lawns, deed restrictions, community appearance standards, a neighborhood that looked orderly and spacious and desirable from the street. The feedback loop was now running. Chapter 5. The formula copies itself. Through the 1950s and 1960s, new subdivisions appeared across the country with a consistency that felt natural only because it was so widespread. Single-story ranch houses, curving streets, wide setbacks from the road, open front yards, minimal front yard fencing. The pattern repeated from Long Island to Southern California, from the suburbs of Chicago to the suburbs of Houston, with local variations in exterior materials and lot sizes, but with the same underlying design logic. Developers were not following a single blueprint. They were responding to a professional consensus that had formed around what sold. Open lawns looked good in advertising photographs. They made developments look more spacious than they were. Buyers, by the mid-1950s, had come to expect them not because buyers had consciously chosen the open lawn aesthetic, but because every new development they had seen featured it. Expectation had become preference before most buyers had the opportunity to distinguish between the two. Banks reinforced the consensus. Lending institutions that had worked with developers understood which neighborhood configurations maintained property values most reliably. Uniform, well-maintained communities with consistent appearance standards were easier to appraise and less risky to finance. The mortgage system rewarded the aesthetic, The feedback loop was now fully established. Buyers expected open lawns because developers built them. Developers built them because buyers expected them. Banks financed them because they maintained value. Deed restrictions preserved them, and the next generation of buyers inherited the expectation as a given, not as a preference shaped by a specific history, but as simply the way neighborhoods look. The open front lawn had traveled from Olmsted's deliberate design philosophy to Nichols's commercial innovation, to Levitt's mass production, to an industry-wide default in the space of about 80 years. Most of the people living with the result had no awareness of any of it. If you want to discover more hidden stories behind the world around us, subscribe to the channel. Chapter 6: The HOA and the Written Rules. Developers build communities and then move on. Someone had to maintain the appearance of what they had built. That responsibility fell increasingly to homeowners associations, the private governing bodies whose deed restriction documents homeowners agree to when they buy a property in a managed community. HOAs existed in various forms before Levittown. J.C. Nichols had pioneered community association governance in Kansas City beginning in 1906. But the post-war suburban boom created them at a new scale. In 1970, there were approximately 10,000 homeowners associations in the United States. By 2023, there were approximately 365,000, covering roughly 74 million Americans. The institution that had been a feature of carefully planned upscale communities in 1910 had become the governance mechanism for a significant fraction of the entire country's residential housing stock. Front yard fence restrictions are among the most common HOA rules. Surveys of HOA documents find them in approximately 40 to 60% of associations. The specific rules vary. Some prohibit front yard fencing entirely. Others require prior approval before a fence can be installed. Others specify acceptable materials, limit height to a few feet, or restrict fencing to certain portions of the lot. The effect across all of these variations is similar. The open lawn aesthetic established by the original developer is preserved, enforced, and transmitted to each successive owner of the property. The stated rationale is property value protection. A neighborhood that maintains consistent appearance standards is a neighborhood where individual property values are sheltered from the effects of a neighbor's aesthetic choices. If every home presents an orderly open front, the visual quality of the street, and therefore the market value of each home on it, is protected from the kind of visual disruption that a fence, or an unmowed lawn, or an unconventional landscaping choice might create. This rationale is financially coherent. It is also a form of collective governance over private property that most HOA members accept without much reflection, partly because they agreed to it at closing, partly because it maintains the appearance of the neighborhood they chose to live in, and partly because it has been the operating assumption of residential America for so long that questioning it requires a deliberate effort. On paper, HOA fence restrictions were about property values. In practice, they were also about something that nobody designed explicitly, but that the open lawn suburb produced as a natural consequence. A specific relationship between neighbors, a specific kind of visibility, and a question that turns out to have a more complicated answer than it first appears. Does the open front lawn actually make communities more connected? Chapter 7: The Front Porch and the Backyard Patio. Before the war, daily life in American residential neighborhoods happened, to a significant degree, in the front. The front porch was the transitional space between private home and public neighborhood. Families sat there in the evenings. Children played where their parents could see them from the porch, and where neighbors walking past could see them from the sidewalk. People stopped to talk. The porch was a permeable boundary. You were at home, but you were also, in some limited sense, available, present to the neighborhood. The ranch house changed this architecturally. The porch was diminished or eliminated. The sliding glass door opened onto the backyard patio instead of onto the front lawn. The barbecue grill arrived in the early 1950s and became, within a decade, a fixture of American middle-class life, not at the front of the house, but behind it. Birthday parties moved to the backyard. Summer evenings moved to the patio. The social center of family life drifted away from the street. The irony is precise and worth stating clearly. The open front lawn was designed to make neighborhoods feel more unified, more shared, more communal. The visual continuity of uninterrupted green space was supposed to create the impression, and ideally the reality, of a neighborhood that belonged, in some sense, to everyone in it. And yet the same post-war suburb that eliminated the front yard fence also eliminated the front porch. It moved life around to the back of the house. It enclosed the space where daily activity actually happened. The neighborhood still looked open. The lawns still flowed together without visible boundaries. From the street, from a photograph, from an advertisement, the open suburb looked exactly as Olmsted and Levitt and the HOA documents intended it to look. But from behind the house, where the actual life of the family was taking place, it was more private than any fenced Victorian neighborhood had been. The fence had moved. It was just invisible now, built out of the distance between the backyard patio and the street that nobody walked down anymore. The American suburb produced one of the most effective forms of private daily life in human history, inside a landscape designed to look maximally open. The front lawn was a stage, the backyard was a room, and most people who lived in this arrangement found it perfectly comfortable without ever examining how it had come to exist. Chapter 8. Eyes on the Street, or Not. The urban theorist Jane Jacobs described something she called eyes on the street in her 1961 book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. Her argument was that the safety and vitality of urban neighborhoods depended on passive surveillance, the natural watching that happens when people who live, work, and move through a street can see it. Store owners glancing out their windows, residents on stoops, pedestrians passing by. This informal, uncoordinated oversight makes streets safer and neighborhoods more alive than any formal policing can. The open front lawn, in theory, creates exactly this condition at a residential scale. If there are no fences interrupting the view, neighbors can see each other's driveways and front doors. Unusual activity is visible. The street is watched over, in the casual sense, by the people who live along it. The practical limitation is that Jacobs was describing dense urban neighborhoods where people lived close together, walked to daily destinations, and spent meaningful time in view of the street. In the American suburb, the distances are larger, the foot traffic is lower, and daily life has retreated to the back of the house. The front lawn creates visual continuity, but in a landscape designed around the automobile rather than the pedestrian, there are fewer eyes to put on the street. The fenced European neighborhood and the open American one are different answers to the same question. How should neighbors share space? The European answer tends to produce clearly bounded private space with less visual continuity between properties. The American answer produces visual continuity with less clearly defined private space. Neither arrangement is inherently superior. They produce genuinely different daily experiences, different relationships between privacy and visibility, between the individual household and the street. What they share is that neither was chosen by the people living in the resulting landscape through any direct democratic process. Both were produced by historical accumulation centuries of tradition in the European case, a specific set of decisions by landscape architects, developers, and governing documents in the American one. Chapter 9. The fences come back. The American front yard largely remained open as the 20th century progressed. The American backyard did not. Beginning in the 1970s and accelerating through the 1980s and 1990s, backyard fencing expanded steadily across suburban America. The reasons were practical and accumulating. Dog ownership increased. The American Pet Products Association found that approximately 38% of households owned dogs in 1988, rising to approximately 45% by the 2020s. Dogs need fenced yards. Children's play spaces needed secure boundaries. Swimming pools, as their ownership expanded through the post-war decades, were subject to safety regulations in many jurisdictions that required enclosure. Vinyl fencing arrived in the 1980s, reducing both the cost and the maintenance burden of installation. The backyard fence became common. The front yard remained largely open, partly because of HOA restrictions, partly because the expectation of openness was by now so thoroughly established that departing from it felt like a statement rather than a choice. Families who wanted privacy, security, and a usable outdoor space built fences behind the house. The front remained the stage. The back became the room. This arrangement, open front, fenced back, now feels so natural in American residential life that most people have no sense of it as an arrangement at all. It is simply what yards are like, but it is the product of decades of specific decisions layered on top of each other. Olmsted's design philosophy, Nichols's commercial system, the Levitt's mass production, the HOA's enforcement, and the practical needs of families that the original designers never anticipated. The arrangement the American suburb arrived at, open front, private back, is a compromise between two things that were never formally reconciled: the community ideal that the open lawn was supposed to represent, and the private life that families actually needed to live. Neither side of the compromise was planned from the beginning. Both emerged from the interaction of design philosophy with commercial logic, with practical necessity over the course of about a century. Chapter 10. What it cost. The open lawn aesthetic, enforced across tens of millions of American properties, has environmental consequences that nobody was calculating in 1947. Lawn grass is the most widely irrigated crop in America by surface area. Estimates based on satellite data and land use surveys suggest approximately 40 million acres of lawn in the United States, more land than is planted with corn, wheat, or any other single crop. Americans spend approximately $47 billion annually on lawn care. In regions where lawn grass does not grow naturally without intensive support, much of the American South and West, maintaining the open lawn aesthetic requires ongoing irrigation, fertilization, and pesticide application that have measurable effects on local water supplies and soil chemistry. The HOA rules and deed restrictions that preserve the open lawn aesthetic are also, in many cases, rules that effectively require this environmental expenditure. An association that mandates grass in front yards and prohibits certain low-water alternatives is an association that locks its members into a particular landscaping regime, regardless of the local climate's suitability for it. These consequences were invisible in 1869, when Olmsted designed Riverside, and they were invisible in 1947, when Abraham Levitt planted his fruit trees. They are visible now. Several states and municipalities have begun allowing or encouraging HOA members to replace grass with drought-tolerant plantings. The open lawn ideal, which developed in a period when its environmental footprint was not a matter of public concern, is beginning to encounter a different set of social priorities. Chapter 11. The design rule nobody voted on. No national law ever removed the front yard fence from American homes. No president announced a new residential policy. No vote was taken by the families who would eventually inherit the open lawn suburb. What happened instead was a convergence of decisions made by people with different purposes over the course of more than a century. In 1870, Frank Scott argued that beauty should be shared with the street rather than enclosed behind fences. In 1869, Frederick Law Olmsted translated that idea into a physical design at Riverside, Illinois, encoding it into deed restrictions that required open lawns in front of every home. In 1906, J.C. Nichols built a commercial system in Kansas City that proved the open lawn aesthetic could protect property values and sustain community governance while also building racial exclusion into the same documents. In the late 1940s, Abraham Levitt applied that aesthetic at mass production scale, planting trees and requiring lawn maintenance in a development of 17,000 homes that became the most widely copied residential model in American history. And in the decades that followed, Homeowners Associations inherited the deed restrictions, enforced the landscape standards, and transmitted the aesthetic to each successive buyer. Each decision was made by someone with a specific and limited purpose. Scott wanted to make a moral argument about shared beauty. Olmsted wanted to demonstrate that designed landscape could produce social benefits. Nichols wanted to sell houses and protect their value. Levitt wanted to build homes that families could afford. HOAs wanted to maintain the neighborhoods that developers had left in their care. None of them were designing the relationship between neighbors in the American suburb. None of them were trying to answer the question of how private and public life should be balanced in a residential neighborhood. They were solving the problems in front of them, and the aggregate of their solutions produced an arrangement that feels completely natural to the people living with it. If you grew up in a suburb with an open front lawn, if that image is what neighborhood means to you, the design that produced that feeling was not accidental and was not chosen by the people who lived in it. It was chosen by developers and enforced by deed restrictions and inherited by associations and accepted by each successive generation because it was already there. The property line is still there. You just can't see it. That stretch of grass from your front door to the sidewalk is the product of more than 150 years of design decisions, commercial logic, community governance, and cultural inheritance, most of it invisible to the people walking across it. The fence didn't disappear because Americans are friendlier than their counterparts in other countries. It disappeared because specific people, at specific moments, decided that an open lawn would look better, sell better, and hold its value better than a fenced one. And once that decision had been made often enough, and enforced long enough, and inherited by enough generations of homeowners who never thought to question it, it stopped looking like a decision. It just looked like home. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more.